On the afternoon of October 16th, 1906, a Prussian captain marched into the town hall of Penick, a quiet municipality on the edge of Berlin, at the head of a squad of armed soldiers. He announced the mayor was under arrest on suspicion of financial irregularities. Guards sealed the doors. Within the hour, the captain had emptied the municipal treasury, placed the mayor and the town treasurer under guard, and sent them by carriage toward Berlin for questioning. Then he vanished. No one in that building had checked his papers or asked his name. The uniform alone had been enough. Within days, the true identity of the captain would astonish all of Germany, because he was not a soldier at all, but an aging shoemaker with a long criminal record. Wilhelm Voigt was born in 1849 in Tilsit in East Prussia, the son of a shoemaker. By his teenage years, he had already begun a long career on the wrong side of the law, convicted repeatedly for theft and forgery. Over the following decades, he passed in and out of Prussian prisons, accumulating by his own later account roughly a quarter-century behind bars. He learned his trade as a cobbler inside those walls, along with something else, an intimate familiarity with the paperwork, stamps, and procedures of Prussian bureaucracy, the very machinery he would later turn against itself. By his late 50s, he was an aging former convict with little money and fewer prospects, a man the state had marked as unfit to be trusted, in a country that demanded proof of trust before it would let him earn a living. In 1906, freshly released, Voigt ran into a wall built entirely of paper. Prussian law required a resident to hold a valid passport or residence certificate to be employed, and required proof of employment to obtain that certificate. A man with a criminal record could not easily get either. He applied, he was refused, he appealed, he was refused again. Berlin authorities, and then the authorities of neighboring towns, declined to register him. He was, in the eyes of the state, a man permitted to exist nowhere in particular. It was this deadlock, more than any single grievance, that is generally understood to have pushed Voigt toward an audacious idea, one that would use the very apparatus that had rejected him. If a uniform could open doors that his own name could not, then a uniform was what he would acquire. Voigt did not steal a uniform. He built one, piece by piece, over several weeks, buying used military garments from second-hand dealers and costume shops around Berlin, the kind of trade that quietly supplied actors and retired officers alike. A tunic here, a pair of boots there, an officer's cap, and finally the insignia of a captain in a Guards infantry regiment. Individually, the items were unremarkable and entirely legal to purchase. Assembled on his body, they transformed a man in his late 50s, a former convict, into what every soldier on the street had been trained since childhood to obey without question. Voigt understood something the Prussian state had spent a century teaching its citizens, that the uniform, not the man wearing it, carried the authority. He simply intended to test how far that authority would carry him. On the morning of October 16th, 1906, dressed as a captain, Voigt stopped small groups of soldiers marching through the streets of Berlin, guardsmen returning to their barracks after drill. Invoking an order from the very top, he detached about a dozen men from their units, formed them into an improvised squad, and marched them off, no officer of theirs having any reason to question a superior's uniform. Soldiers of that era were drilled to obey rank on sight, not to verify it. Voigt led his borrowed company to a railway station and boarded a train, still in full uniform, his conscripted soldiers beside him, bound for the small town of Penick on the outskirts of the capital. Not one of them yet knew what their captain actually intended to do when they arrived. At Penick, Voigt marched his soldiers to the town hall, a handsome red brick building that still stands today, and posted guards at every door and stairwell. He informed the officials inside that he was acting on higher orders in a matter of suspected embezzlement. No one asked to see written authorization. In the chaos of soldiers filling the corridors, resistance did not occur to anyone in the building. Voigt proceeded to the office of the mayor, Georg Langerhans, and placed him under arrest, along with the town treasurer, on the fabricated charge of financial irregularities. It was, by any measure, an extraordinary scene, an entire town government brought to a halt by a man whose only real weapon was a coat, and the certainty with which he wore it. Voigt then turned to the town treasury and confiscated its contents, reportedly just over 4,000 marks, for which he issued the treasurer a signed receipt, a small bureaucratic courtesy from a man who understood paperwork better than most. He ordered the mayor and the treasurer placed in a hired vehicle and sent under guard to Berlin for what he described as further interrogation, a maneuver that conveniently removed the two men most able to expose him before he needed to leave. With the town's leadership dispatched and the money in hand, Voigt gave his borrowed soldiers a final order to remain at their posts for a set interval, thanked them for their service, and walked out of the building alone. Once outside, Voigt disappeared into the streets, shed the uniform, and vanished. Back at the rat house, the soldiers eventually stood down. The mayor and treasurer were released once officials in Berlin found no record of any such investigation, and the truth settled in with an almost comic slowness that an entire town hall had been captured, robbed, and released again by a single man wearing borrowed authority. Telegraph wires carried the story within hours. By the next morning, it was in newspapers across Germany, and within days it had crossed into the foreign press as well, a small town's misfortune turning, almost overnight, into a story the whole of Europe found irresistible. Police across Prussia searched for the imposter for 10 days. Voigt was finally recognized and arrested in Berlin on October 26, 1906, reportedly betrayed by an acquaintance for the reward money. He confessed readily and, by most accounts, without much remorse, explaining that he had wanted only a passport and had improvised the rest. At trial that December, prosecutors focused not on robbery but on the impersonation of an officer, forgery, and unlawful confinement of the mayor and treasurer. He was convicted and sentenced to 4 years in prison, a relatively light sentence given the audacity of the crime, one that reflected the court's own uncertainty about how seriously to treat a scheme built entirely out of costume and confidence. The case became a sensation precisely because it embarrassed the institutions Voigt had exploited. Newspapers and cabarets across Germany mocked the ease with which soldiers, clerks, and a mayor had all deferred to a uniform without asking a single question. Even Kaiser Wilhelm II was reported to have been amused rather than offended, reportedly calling Voigt a wicked but clever fellow. Petitions for clemency circulated, and in August 1908, after serving under 2 years of his sentence, Voigt received an imperial pardon. He walked out of prison already something Germany had rarely produced from its penal system before: a genuine celebrity, a man famous not for a fortune stolen, but for exposing exactly how little stood between an ordinary citizen and unquestioned authority. Voigt spent his remaining years trading on the fame the swindle had brought him, publishing a memoir, touring wax museums and stages across Europe, and selling signed postcards of himself in the captain's uniform. As Germany's economy collapsed after the First World War, a group of admirers arranged him a small pension in Luxembourg, and he settled there, dying in Luxembourg City in January 1922, in his early 70s. His story outlived him. In 1931, the playwright Karl Zuckmayer turned it into a satirical drama still performed today, and a statue of Voigt now stands outside the same penick town hall he once occupied. The receipt he wrote for the stolen treasury survives in the archive there. The most ordinary object at the center of an extraordinary afternoon, still proof of what happened and of how little anyone had thought to question it.